everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bullish on Business. I'm your host, Rose Odette. I'm bringing you a guest who's brilliant, bold, and deeply entrenched in the front line of knowledge work, Lisa Rabey. She is a librarian who doesn't just work for one library, she actually serving across three.
Mhm.
That alone should give you a sense of her stamina, her values, and her commitment to public access, literacy, and intellectual freedom. Wow.
Mhm.
And I found that the minute I met her. She's also a longtime writer and a cultural documentarian who's been blogging and creating content online for decades. I
Mhm.
met Lisa through the Office of Possibilities. Those of you that hang out with me on this podcast a lot will you know that I love going to OOPS, is what we call it for short. And within 5 minutes, I saw her across the room, we have to wait. And I just sprung up from my chair and I ran over. I want you on this podcast. And I wanted to feature her because I love libraries. I was a librarian too, and twice. Lisa lives and breathes the future of information, but she also honors the past, whether it's zines, underground communities, or digital archives. This episode is for you thinkers, you readers, and you possibility makers. So let's dive in. How are you doing today, Lisa?
Good. I don't know if I can live up to your description.
Hey, it's all true. It's all coming right from your experience and who you are as a person.
No, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you there, but it was funny that you should mention all of that because I was out walking my dog before we met, and I was thinking I'm a feckin' unicorn because not only do I have the technical knowledge from the years I worked in the tech industry, but I also have the humanities knowledge. And when I teach tech classes, I tell them I can translate geek to English and back again because it's just what I've been doing for a very long time. So it just feels like second nature to me.
Well, that is a very rare skill, and I think that is your students are probably very grateful that you can bridge that so fluidly. Well, like we do on all of the podcasts, people like to know people, ask people first. So
Hmm.
tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and where you live, and
Okay.
your back.
So I have dual citizenship. I'm both American and Canadian, but I've spent 98% of my life living in the US. So there's that. A lot of people seem really interested in the fact that I have dual citizenship. I don't know what it is about Canadians they find attractive, but I always get a lot of compliments when I tell them I carry two passports. So I have lived all over the US. I met my husband online back in 1997. So way, way when meeting somebody online was super creepy and you didn't know if they were a mass murderer or not. But he and I met and we were together for quite some time. And then we split and then we got back together and we have been back together for 17, 18 years. So um, we live in northern Michigan, so we live outside of Traverse City, and we have been up here for the last couple of years. My husband does tech. He's in cybersecurity and server administration are several of his foretells. I am a huge fan of trashy television, so if it's trashy TV, I watch it. I need brain candy. Um, in
What,
addition to
what programs are you considering trashy? They may be somebody's treasure.
But yeah, absolutely. I watched the whole 90 Day Fiancé franchise,
Awesome.
and one of my very close friends is also a fan, and so she and I get together via video once a week and watch episodes. So, and then we chit chat about it while we're watching. So we have a co-watching opportunity with that. So 90 Day Fiancé, Survivor, Love is Blind, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, anything where there's a lot of messy drama is where we tend to navigate to. We have been watching several Japanese dating relationship shows, and the big stark contrast is that in Japan, they're much more reserved. So one show we were watching, like to hold hands was like a huge deal. And my husband and I were joking that in the US, they probably have already had sex 12 times by this point and they're plotting their marriage. It's just, it's wildly crazy the difference in cultural approaches to romance. And as a writer, I write romance, so I'm a big fan. That's where, my heaving bosom books come in. I'm a voracious reader. I am on track to read about 125 books this year. And I don't read just romance. I read across numerous genres. I am really big into research. So, for example, I am reading Normal Women by Philippa Gregory. She's a historian. And the book is essentially the biography of the role of women in England from the Norman conquest in 1066 all the way up to present time. So as she's walking through and talking about, when women had, could live by themselves and defend themselves and the roles they had and the jobs they had. And she mentions famous women from that time. And of course, there's material on them that's been looked at from an academic lens. So I will interlibrary loan those books and read that in conjunction with whatever I'm reading. So my director at one of my libraries had said that if somebody on the cover is wearing a ruff or tights, I'm probably going to read it.
Wow, that sounds like I would like to read that too. What was the name of the book?
The name of the book is called Normal Women,
Okay.
and it's
Okay,
by
I'll
Philippa
put comments
Gregory.
too, 'cause I'm
Okay. I
you.
will, when I email you, I'll email you the title.
Okay.
But it is hefty. It's 700 pages long.
Ooh, wow. Yeah.
So,
Wow. Well, very, very, I can understand why you are so bookish and into all these libraries. So
mm.
what's it like working across three library systems?
Well,
Grounded in
uh,
doing
go
like
ahead, Rose. I'm sorry.
how does that all play out in your life?
So, interestingly, I originally trained as an academic librarian. So, I worked for a university and a community college for a good chunk of my career. It is extremely difficult, and no one knows why this is, for somebody to work in academic libraries to transfer over to a public library. A lot of librarian services, such as reference, um, talking about programming, research, it's very close. Your subjects may change, from somebody who's in a public library, from somebody who's in an academic library, but for some reason the jump over always has been really difficult. So, left those positions. My husband and I moved to Louisville, Kentucky for a couple of years, and we've always had our place in Northern Michigan. So we have been coming up here for 13, 14 years now. We've just made the jump to living here permanently. But I am also the secretary for one of the library's Friends Board.
Mm.
So the director of the library got to know me, and I emailed them last year and said, hey, I'm coming up, we're moving up. I said, do you need any substitutes or what have you? And he was like, yeah, absolutely, and took me on. And because he gave me such a high recommendation, the other libraries picked me up as well. So my title across all the libraries is completely different. Um, the pay is wildly different depending upon which township I'm in. So that's, libraries, no one goes into libraries expecting they're going to make, millions of dollars. That's just not going to happen. So the library that I'm working at now, the primary library I'm working at now, I've been there for a year. And so my duties range from, I do reference. So if you have a question, you come up, or you're looking for a book, you come up to us. I also do collection development, which means that I work in this particular library. I manage the large print collection. So I make sure the collection is geared for our community. So our community skews older. So we have a fairly large print collection, and they like mysteries, and westerns.
Mhm.
So I tend to do that kind of collection. I do deselection, also known as weeding. Well, I'll remove books out of circulation that haven't been circulated themselves in years. And then for those books, just so everybody doesn't panic, for those books that we take out of circulation, we sell ours through the Friends group bi-yearly sale. So they go to a good home. If we can't sell the book, then we put it in our little free library. If that doesn't work, then we also donate them to someplace like St. Vincent de Paul's or Goodwill or somewhere along those lines so they can get sold. Um, in an academic library sense, we recycled the books because I was pulling out books for Windows 95 in 2014. So that information is outdated, so that got recycled. So, library books go in a variety of different ways, and a friend of mine had quipped about a year ago that we're probably the #1 destroyer of books. So when people get upset, I tend to remind them it's the message, not the medium. You can always get another copy. But yeah, so I have other duties as assigned. I've done everything from, cleaning bathrooms to getting rid of cobwebs to helping a patron design a poster. So this is not uncommon for public libraries, and especially in rural libraries, because that's where I work. You do everything. There is no cleaner that comes in. There is no backup if something gets sick. We're responsible for everything in the library. So we have to make sure that we're on it 24/7. So I'm really grateful for my primary library because my director is great. And she is from, I don't recall if she's from Wisconsin or from Minnesota, but her husband is from the Sioux area.
Okay.
And so she is not Midwest nice. She's not passive aggressive. She's a straight shooter. So, and I really appreciate that about her because she's very direct when things happen. So I really love my boss. It would be very difficult for me to leave the position. The only reason why I would consider leaving it would be one, Nerd Girl Industries takes off to the point where I can't handle 2 jobs, or I find a position that pays more and gives me more hours.
Well,
So,
what a range of responsibilities.
oh, absolutely.
What would you say in today's era of libraries is the most underrated component in a library?
I think the simple fact that people don't not understand, but how about this? They're not aware of the wide variety of services a library carries. So, if you have a bigger library, they tend to have small business information. You can get a notary public. You can have help processing your passport. If you live in a area where there's a large number of, let's say, Spanish speakers, they'll have ESL classes. There's programming that ranges all the way from babies all the way up to seniors. Plus, that's in addition to loaning out books and DVDs. I mean, we also have the Internet of Things. So through Traverse Area District Library, you can check out cake pans, you can check out amps. Our small library, you can check out musical instruments on top of games and puzzles and STEM kits. And, I think I actually have a presentation that I've done um, for non-librarians called Not Your Mother's Librarian, Libraries in the 21st Century. And I'm actually going to be giving that presentation through Creative Mornings, if you're familiar with them. And so the idea is to kind of promote that the services a library has goes way above and beyond which most people understand. And when people find out I can go do all these things, like libraries even rent computer or loan computers out and Wi-Fi spots. So when people are like, I can go get, Google Chromebook, or I can get a hotspot, or use a library's computers and print and copy and scan or whatever, they're like, their mind is blown because most people still think that all libraries do, libraries do is we give out books and media and we sit around and read all day. So,
Well,
which is wholly not true.
go circle back and tell us about the morning program that you would.
Creative Mornings.
What is that?
Um, Creative Mornings is really, it's a super cool organization. They are based originally, they were started in New York, I think like a decade ago. And the concept was a place for creatives to get together once a month, hear a talk, and kind of network and bond and get to know each other. And that has spawned into an entire industry. So now there's creative morning chapters all over the world. Grand Rapids has a creative mornings chapter. Um, and it's just phenomenal. I'm trying to get one started up here in Traverse City because with the tech hub through 20 Fathoms, the entrepreneurship level, the number of creatives that are up here, this would be like a perfect hotspot for it.
What?
Anyways, they have something they call virtual field trips, and they have these all month long. They are free. All you need to do is sign up. If you can't make it, they send you a link to the presentation so you can watch it at your leisure. And it's on everything from doing a LinkedIn glow up to yoga for creativity. I mean, it's a wide range of
Wow.
stuff. And so
Wow.
sorry?
I'm just thanking you because this is great too. I'm going to put that in the show notes as well because that's very cool. I had no idea that existed, and I really appreciate your depth and breadth of knowledge. And
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just to kind of wrap that part up, they have a friend of mine saw my presentation, Not Your Mother's Librarian, and she's like, this would be perfect for creative mornings. And I was like, based upon what they've shown in the past, I'm like, no, maybe not. And finally one day I just said, F it, I'm gonna go ahead and sign up and see what happens. And the organizers in their presentation submissions say if you don't hear from us within 30 days, plan on us not accepting your proposal because either it's been repetitive or we don't have a slot for it or whatever. And I was like, I completely forgot I submitted. And 75 days later is when I got the acceptance email. So I just filled out all the paperwork, got everything set up. The creative mornings that I'm scheduled to present on is in the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. They have their Zoom room can take up, I think, 800 or 1,000 people, attendees. And when I go, the average number of attendees is anywhere between 300 to 400 people. So this is going to be, even though it's on Zoom,
yes.
yeah, it's going to be huge. And they totally are okay with you promoting your business.
Oh, good.
So that's, I'll be wrapping that in as well. So,
What a perfect. Let's pivot
okay.
and talk a little bit more about that. So, how has your voice as a writer evolved across blogging, e-zines, and digital culture? How do you really project?
So initially my first blog post was in 1996, and the word blog hadn't been coined then. We actually called ourselves online journalists or online memorists. And I was working for a tech company, and the administrative assistant, the executive administrative assistant, had a blog, and she was jotting down her daily life, things she was doing, just, as a diary. And I was like, that is super cool because I've always kept a diary of some chance, but I also am an exhibitionist to some level. And I'm like, this is super cool. So I bought a domain, this was before WordPress, this was before movable type, this was before any kind of content management system existed. And I did all the coding by hand. I taught myself HTML and CSS. And I would just write about my life. and I would recount stories, and I would talk about the past. And Wired magazine actually interviewed me. There's a link on one of my sites to the article from 1998, 97, 98. That's in their archive, but you can still read it. And it kind of just grew from there. And so when I write like I talk. I'm very personable, very conversational. I have a dry sense of humor. I I also have some sarcasm that's built into that. So when I write, because I have a newsletter as well now, because that's where everybody has done a 180 to, is newsletters. It's the same concept. Like, for example, I just sent out a newsletter yesterday about the adventures of a concert that I went to this weekend in Detroit and the entire thing that happened. So when I write, though, because I also write nonfiction, I was doing graphic novel reviews for a site, and now I write essays for Every Library and the International Bipolar Foundation. And those topics hit my two primary interests, which is libraries and mental health. So I still keep the personable and the conversational, but those are a little bit more directed towards a completely different audience. So I have to tune not my personality, but my style changes for that too. And I also, when I am on social media, because I'm a big fan of Blue Sky, it's kind of a combination of both. And on LinkedIn, I have started becoming more active on LinkedIn just to see, because I've been meeting a lot of people like you and a lot of other cool people via Oops and via all the stuff going through 20 Fathoms. And so we all connect with each other on LinkedIn, and I want to show them the diversity of my personality. So not only am I talking about Nerd Girl Industries, but here are other things that are of interest to me and why it relates to a professional slash business world. So I've been doing a lot more posting on LinkedIn as a social media content. And I don't have as many followers as you do, Rose, but it is slowly growing. But I'm very cautious about connections. I actually did this as a poll, because when I did the LinkedIn Glow Up virtual field trip at Creative Mornings, they were recommending that you download the chat's transcript from Zoom and connect with every single person on there via LinkedIn. And I did that, and I was like, well, I said, okay, well, I'll introduce myself to them and say, hey, we were in this virtual field trip together. Let's connect. We have similar interests or whatever. And the problem I found with that is I started getting a lot of spam because a lot of people use their LinkedIn more as a obsessive promotional tool rather than creating true or authentic connections. So I've kind of pulled back. I didn't do that many people. I think I did like 10 to kind of test it out. And I've severely pulled back from that. And I did a poll on LinkedIn and I said, okay, I see a lot of people who have LinkedIn doesn't tell you the number of people that you're connected to. It just says over 500. So it will tell you the number of followers you have, but it won't tell you how many true connections. People can't see how many true connections you have. And I did a poll and I said, hey, curious if you connect with somebody that you know or you want to cultivate relationship with, or do you connect with someone that just sends you a connection? And interestingly, most of the people that responded, almost all of them said they connect with someone that they know or someone they want to build a relationship with. They don't randomly connect with someone. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Everyone has their own reasons, and
Mhm.
I agree with you. LinkedIn is just like any social media. It's what you put into it, it's what you get out of it.
Right.
Uh and I'm with you, these random spams that I get into my in basket, it really dilutes the email portion or the chat portion. The DM
Mhm.
portion is is something that I rarely even look at it because it's always full of junk. But
Yep, I'm of the same mind as well.
yeah, I really enjoy the communities and the different newsletters. Uh,
Hmm.
so I think that um, it's got its pluses and minuses, like all social media. But I think that you definitely have had a long experience as a blogger and using the tools and being being so digital for so long.
Yeah,
Can you tell
I
us,
live on the internet.
yeah, can you tell us the origin story of Nerdy Girl?
Nerd girl? Okay, yeah, sure. Absolutely. So when I worked in tech back in the late 90s, I was living in Silicon Valley with my now husband, and I worked for an internet service provider or an ISP. And that's not a term you hear a lot these days. You just hear of providers, service providers. Anyways, so this is in the late 90s, and we had a lot of people who were getting online. This is still in the days of dial-up. Okay, so like broadband was just a blink in an eye at this point. And people were having difficulties getting connected online or learning how to use the internet or email or how do I do a search for something and all that good stuff. So I love teaching. So I volunteered to start uh, putting the classes together and teaching the classes, and they were very popular. So that was something that I really excelled at. Plus, I was doing tech support at the time was my position. And walking, there's I get this really great satisfaction of walking someone through on how to do something and the sense of accomplishment they feel because now they understand how X works. So that's kind of what started Nerd Girl Industries. And then I was a network engineer for a very large ISP. They were global. And that company got bought out by another company, and the buyout company ended up having a $10 billion account deficit. So this was in 2002. They started laying off people across the company to kind of make up for the deficit. And I was not laid off, but I had come into an opportunity to go back to college. So I did a 180. I gave my resignation, and I left the company in October, and in January, I was in a college classroom. And I did not go into tech I did not go into computer science or anything tech. I went into humanities. So I have a dual bachelor's in English Lit and art history. But I always kept in touch with tech. I was constantly I wouldn't say I was like on the cutting edge, but I would buy something, I would learn how to use it, and then I would become very adept at it. And a lot of my friends, just like, 10 years prior when I was working in Silicon Valley, they were having difficulties. Well, how do I do this? Or my computer isn't working or whatever. And so I started helping them. And then when I went to grad school, it was the same situation. And from then, this is where social media started coming about. So Twitter came about in late 2006, and I got my account in 2007. So I was one of the first people once it started spreading globally to get on Twitter. And so I started teaching small businesses and nonprofits on how to use social media. And I will read, and I was writing articles about social media at the same time as well. And I was also doing independent study on how social media is used in libraries. And I read some of the articles that I wrote 15, 16 years ago, and they're still so relevant today. Like, it's so crazy. Like, libraries are the worst on social media. Like, they can be the forefront of tech, but getting them on social media is like pulling teeth. I don't understand why, but and a lot of businesses are that way as well. Like, they don't understand how social media can be used as a force of good. And so I was working for a Fortune 50 company as a content developer, and I got laid off from them. And my husband and I were kind of spitballing ideas on what my next step would be. And, he's like, with how much you help people, and I had gotten paid for it on and off over the years, he's like, why don't you start a business helping people? And I was like, that's great. So I created an LLC in like 10 minutes, and I already owned the domain nerdgirl.net, and the name Nerd Girl Industries just popped in my head. So I was like, all right, well, that's what I am. And I contacted a friend of mine, and she did the design of my logo. And that's how Nerd Girl came to be. And the business is constantly evolving. What I originally started out to do was acting as a social media manager, but going back to the teaching and the workshops, most people want to learn how to do it themselves. They don't necessarily want to pay a social media manager to do it. They want to have the opportunity to do it themselves. So I am slowly doing a 180 from doing it for other people to now teaching them how to do it. So I started doing workshops earlier this year, and surprisingly, they've been successful. So I'm now teaching for a couple of websites. My classes are going to be sold off my website, and they're also going to be on Udemy as well.
Awesome. Very cool. Oh my gosh. Well, you bring up some memories because back in 1997,
Hmm.
I actually launched an ISP here in Cadillac, and I bought a whole rack of like 200 modems, all those phone lines. So, and put up a Linux server and was doing all sorts of stuff, and ended up it worked out great, and I had it for probably 5 years until it was sunsetted. But we had some nefarious activity on our server, and we found somebody was using our server for a porn site. So that was scary. So you live and you learn, and we got rid of that. But that's my racy story of being an
That's
IS.
fantastic. Well, the ISP I worked for, the funding came, the owner actually did run porn sites. So the funding for the legitimate ISP came from all his porn sites that he ran as well.
I'm not that smart. I should have picked up on that. I was just upset, and now you look at it. I should have looked at it that point. I probably would be a lot more well off today if I had taken that, but I probably wouldn't be. Wow, I love this conversation. You're just blowing my mind. So many
Oh,
cultural shifts you brought up. There's so many different things, You've lived through the dial-up revolution, the whole pre-blogging, blogging. How do I, load the system? How helping people figure out their social media. Now we're into AI. Oh, we got the burnout culture, so much media noise going on out
mm.
there. How has that all shaped your personal work?
That's a really good question, actually. And it's a question that I think about all the time, even if I don't articulate it in my head as such. When you asked it, I was like, oh, yes, I do think about this all the time. Well, the big thing is, I'm very, very pro information literacy. I think information as a whole should be free.
Mhm.
And I think that it should not be institutionalized. By that, I mean, I have worked with companies who have people who've worked there 5 years, 10 years, whatever. And as the new kid on the block, they don't want to share what they know, because I'm like, well, I'm going to create some kind of, tech document to document all this stuff that we're doing, so that if I leave, the next person coming in can go ahead and take over. And they were very reluctant to give that up. And it's not uncommon. So I teach a class called Research Beyond AI. Now, I need to preface this because people assume when I mention the title that I'm against Gen AI. I am not against Gen AI, but because of the issues with Gen AI, especially with doing resources and research, it can be a good starting off point, but I want to empower people to know there are options out there they can go to peer-reviewed, vetted, uh, databases and websites so they can get information that is current and correct and has already been researched and all that good stuff. So the class goes through that and also teaches people how to Google like a librarian because there's a lot of Google parameters most people don't access, which is another thing that I've learned. So that's why it got added. And I do tell my attendees, I'm very honest, that I do use Gen AI. I use it primarily to ask questions when I can't find it via Google myself. And one of the examples that I use a lot is that when it comes to technical documentation, most software applications are terrible, like absolutely terrible at doing the documentation. And I will check like Quora or GitHub, or I will check all over the place looking for information on how to do something. And finally, I'll say, feck it, and I'll go to Gemini and I'll tell a very succinct prompt on what I want to do and what I'd like to have done, and it'll give me the step-by-step instructions on how to do it. I recently had an issue where I was getting Easy Digital Downloads plugin to work with the Site Builder Elementor, which is for WordPress. And it was Easy Digital Downloads had listed that they are compatible with Elementor. Elementor backed that up. But when you're looking for support, or if you're looking for some kind of documentation to make sure the implementation is going to go through, there was nothing. But Gemini gave it to me. So I do use Gen AI. I just like to have people feel empowered about where they're getting their information.
You keep mentioning these classes. Where can we find you if I want to be in your class? How do I get in your class?
Okay, so I teach so if you go to nerdgirl.net/workshops, and I'll include that in the notes as well, because I have a long list of email that I'm going to be sending you, Rose.
Okay.
And there are 8 to 10 classes on everything on how to use social media to doing research and beyond. And you can book it either as a one-on-one with me, and it's a live demo. It's not recorded, but it is a live demo that I walk you through the entire thing. The attendee gets a copy of the slide deck so that they can have a reference point. And also along with the deck is that I give them 90-day support, email support
Wow.
within reason. So if you took my intro to social media class and then came back and said, "Hey, Lisa, can you provide me a name of a social media management app that you recommend?" No big deal. I'll get you that. If you come back to me and say, "Hey, help me configure this," excuse me, that is not within reason. That is where you're going to pay me to teach you how to do it.
That makes sense.
And also with the decks, they get free major upgrades for life. So there is a large number of classes. There's 2 pricing structures. There's one price for solo web shops, workshops up to 2 people, and then there's a separate price for groups of 3 or more.
Nice. Very, very helpful. I can't wait to look over that list because it's so intriguing. I'm all curious. So let's talk about subcultures,
Okay.
and communities. And maybe your 2 cents on Substack, because I know that wasn't in the questions, but I'd love your 2 cents on that because you're so cool and I love your point of view. So
Thanks.
subcultures and communities, how have they influenced your worldview?
Oh, I didn't think that would be a tough question, but the more I'm all over it, I'm realizing maybe it is a tough question. This goes back to what I said. I like information for empowerment. So I'm a big fan of Reddit. So I'm on a lot of subreddits for a variety of different topics that I'm interested in. And I find that I can be influenced, but it's more on the fictional side. So, for example, I love the book series and the TV series Bridgerton. So there's always a ton of fan fiction being written or a ton of different pairings or, wherever. And I'll read that and I'll be like, oh, yeah, I really like that idea. Or why didn't Julia Quinn do this? Or whatever the case is. But on the opposite end, if I'm reading something about science or math or history, and it's coming from what could be perceived as a biased point of view, I stop and then I do a quick research before I form an opinion. I like to think that I'm tapped in to most things that are happening on the internet. That's not always true. Not everyone is 100% tapped in, but I always take it with a grain of salt, I
Mhm.
guess is what it boils down to.
Well, I think that's reasonable. And I think that the thing that you bring up about information, I believe information's power. To me, it lines up with education
Mm.
and education information. I love what it's doing to the world. And this is your podcast, not mine, but I think we're like-minded that it really is empowering for everyone. And I love seeing these other countries that have been in the dark for so long waking up, and it just gives me so much inspiration to see that what information is power, and that it also leads to education and freedom.
Yeah, 75% of the world is online, which seems like less than what you would think, but also more than what you would think. And majority of those people are using their phones as the primary source of access to the information. And that leads me on a discussion about website development that we do not have time for.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think I definitely think I am supportive of all those changes and all those new technologies that are coming through because, I feel like I keep harping on myself, but yeah, information is important. And I want somebody who's in Burma to have the exact same access of information as somebody who's in Alaska.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, let's bring it home a little
Okay.
bit. We met at OOPS, which is the Office of Possibilities, and I head over to 20 Fathoms a lot too, and some of the other meetups that happen in Northern Michigan. So what do you take away from OOPS?
Oops, I thought was a very interesting concept. I was actually recommended Oops from somebody who goes there quite regularly. And he thought that as a creative, I might find something of interest out of it. Now, I haven't been in a couple of weeks, and that's primarily because of my schedule. But I plan on being in TC more often than not coming in the coming future, so I'll probably start going back to Oops. But I found it's surprisingly, even though people don't take me up on what I have to offer, they come to me with questions that I can answer. And I found that I ended up networking with people like you, and I have discovered other people that I've actually had lunches with that we've bypassed each other and oops, like they'll go one week and I'll miss or whatever the case is. I find it's a really great community, and I find that what it provides to the TC creative, entrepreneurial, and tech hubs is pretty much needed because you have an area where you have all these three different types of industries coming together and really being supportive and helpful of each other. So yeah, I feel like going to Oops has been one of the better decisions I've made since starting my own business.
Fantastic. Well, I really enjoy it too. And hearing that from you, I mean, you've been in Silicon Valley, you've been all over the country, and now you're up here, thank goodness.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you've seen like little get-togethers and networking events, and
Hmm.
hearing your perspective means a lot to me. So to the dream of the future, and if you had your, and you probably could do this if you wanted to, you could build your own library from scratch. What would it look like?
Oh, wow. That is really hard question to answer. And you may think it's an easy one, but it actually is not. There are three distinct different types of libraries. There's public, special, and academic. So public is what we know of when you go to like Tattle or if you go to New York Public Library or whatever. Special is libraries that tend to cater to specific subjects. So like you might have a medical librarian or an art historian librarian or what have you. And then academic, which is college and universities. And each has their separate community and each one is individually important. So I think I would probably want to gear towards more a public library and offer community services that would be geared for my community and make sure that they could get the access to stuff that they needed. And I would definitely be pushing information literacy classes, which is something that academic librarians do, is we teach information literacy classes to incoming students because they need to know how to research. They need to know how to discern fact from fiction. They need to know how to use the library's databases and collections and all that fun stuff too. So I kind of want to take that mindset and transfer it over into a public library sphere and make sure that, again, if they were in Burma, I want them to have the same access of information that somebody in Alaska has.
Wonderful. I think that that's amazing. And if I were to look at your world, I think
Mhm.
it's amazing. You've got
Oh,
Roman
thank you.
literature, you've got tech, you've got that breadth of experience. And then let's talk a minute about your husband. He does the cyber stuff, which you could bring him in and rest those boomers' minds that they're not their information on the internet isn't gonna get hacked, because I know that's a big barrier for a
Yep.
lot of people that are of a certain age. They just have this fear of putting their info out there. And so I think that that would be very, very cool. We did not talk about your personal books too much. I do want to touch on that. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself as an author?
Sure. I've written, as we were speaking about earlier about my writing career, I've written both personal narratives, aka kind of a bibliographic memoir slash whatever terminology you want to use. But as for my fiction, I write poetry and prose, which tend to be more on the depressing side. And because I am a huge proponent of romance and a big believer in what it brings to literature as a whole, I write both contemporary and historical literature, or romance, I should say. And I have two books that I'm currently working on, and one of them I'm going to finish by December 31st. I have made that promise. Originally, it was supposed to be before my birthday in June, and then life is busy, and then I realized, holy cats, that I'm not done. So NaNoWriMo is no longer in existence, National Novel Writing Month. So a lot of writing aids, such as Pro Writing Aid, and other writers groups have picked up the mantle and are now doing something similar where you write 50,000 words in 1 month. So you're writing a novel. So I am starting back into doing that kind of thing. And I am going to hopefully utilize the month of November to get my novel finished.
Good
And then
luck with
what I'm going to do with it after is who knows. So
Wonderful. Well, Lisa, I really appreciate you today.
thank
Before
you.
we wrap this up, do you have any final words or any comments you'd like to make before we call it a show?
Yeah, imposter syndrome is real.
Yes, isn't that true?
Yeah. I'm saying that because when I hear in my head, it's like, oh, I don't, I'm not a New York Times bestselling writer, or I'm not making $1 zillion in tech, or I'm not doing whatever. But then I hear someone like you introduce me, and you have to, and it's all true. I mean, everything you have said is true. But in my head, I can't comprehend that. And so when you're talking about me in the beginning, I felt embarrassed because you know what I mean? So, imposter syndrome is definitely real. And I think we all should have a rose in our life to remind us how awesome we are.
Well, you are, and I just have to say that you feel that way not only because of imposter syndrome, but because you are genuinely a nice person.
Well, I like to think so.
So that has to do with that too. And what a great way to end our show today. And I want to thank you, Lisa, and thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.